أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh to all our viewers who have joined us and inshallah will be gradually joining us. I would like to welcome you all on today's Lantern of Lights Ramadan Wellbeing Insta Live, where we are going to be discussing a very important topic that I will slowly tell you about. But before moving on to that, I want to give you this amazing welcoming of the holy month of Ramadan. We're so excited to be in this beautiful month, and Alhamdulillah, we are basking in the glory and in the divine love and in the banquet of Allah Subhanahu wa Taala. And this is such a beautiful season which is packed with spiritual perks, reminding us of our primordial nature and how easily we can access the divine codes and falling in love and unearthing ourselves and yielding towards God-centeredness through the nur of the Quran all over again, rekindling our hearts to the warm hospitality of God's grace and beauty that will satiate us from moment to moment in our human becoming journeys. So, inshallah, on today's program, and we will be discussing the topic of forgiveness and resentment. And as you know, that mental health is an integral part of overall health and well-being. In Islam, caring for our mental health is part of our religious duty to honor the gift of life that God has given us. Seeking professional help and treatment for mental health difficulties should be, in fact, seen as an act of faith and worship and not a sign of weakness. And that is why we are, willing to bring in these topics and discussions to you all so that you may benefit. As you know, that together we can heal minds and hearts. I'm just trying to invite our guest on today's program, and inshallah we will get the conversation started. I'm sure everybody is really looking forward to this discussion, inshallah. So yes, here we have our esteemed panelist, our esteemed therapist. Inshallah, I would like to welcome Brother Inayat, Coach Kanji. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. How are you, Brother Inayat?
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Thank you very much for inviting me on the show. I'm very well, thank you. Looking forward to our discussion today. Excited to see what comes of it.
Inshallah. I wish you a very happy Ramadan Kareem. I hope that the fasts are going very well on your side. How are you finding this Ramadan?
Ramadan, in the physical sense, it's relatively easy. As we know, we've been through lots of summer fasts and long days here in the UK in the previous years. So actually, it's in that sense, it's relatively, it's copable, right? If that's the word.
Yeah.
I just made
Okay.
up. But the point is, it's but on a spiritual level, I think like anything, it's. I say to my friends, I'm not in competition with anyone else other than myself. And so every year I recognize the incremental struggles, changes, growth, and everything other. So it's definitely interesting to observe myself to that. Like for instance, on the weekend, where I have rest time as opposed to being busy, I definitely find that in those moments I might struggle a little bit more. My thought patterns, obviously emotions create thoughts, so they reflect that, and within that I recognize that there are still struggles, even though the day is short. So it's interesting. It's just interesting to observe oneself and the process of growth.
Absolutely. So before moving on, I just want to give a very brief introduction about Brother Inayat, Coach Kanji. from Ample Therapy. He's an eclectic life coach and therapist who uses multiple or ample therapies, modalities, coaching skills, expertise, and experience to plant transformational seeds in people's lives and rapidly aid them to grow and flourish. So whether artistic, mental, physical, life coaching, or educational therapy is needed, Coach Kanji aims to deliver, drawing on his varied and vast range of skills and practices. The topic that we've chosen for today is forgiveness and resentment and one's relationship with themselves, which is a very interesting topic, I feel. And I know that many people want to know about this and want to delve into this discussion, especially when it comes to forgiving ourselves in certain scenarios, or having this negative emotion of resentment, which causes bitterness, disappointment sometimes. We're unable to sort of forgive ourselves or the other person in a certain relationship. So I want to ask you, Brother Inayat, when we talk about resentment, how would you define this very casually? What are some of the examples that you can give about this emotion of resentment?
Excellent question. Excellent question, Skeena. Well, as you know, and as you described, I've been fortunate in life that I've, in some way, I call myself a professor of play, because I've got to experience lots of different things. And within that, within like work environments, I used to be a teacher, right? And also study literature. So words for me, they hold a lot of meaning. And then when you combine that with the therapeutic aspects, the artistic aspects, it really does solidify it for me. So in that, I am utilizing somebody else's thought process as well. So I can't say that this is my entire inspiration on my own, but it's really interesting. The word itself, resentment, right? Resent emotion. If you know derivatives and how language links to each other, right?
Yeah.
Resentment, resent emotion, resentment, right? The idea that when one is not able to let go of an emotion or express an emotion at the time of feeling it in a loving and purposeful way of communication rather than a reactionary way, it's often recent around ourselves. And thus, it especially happens with people pleasing. There's a fine line between feeling like you'll offend somebody and expressing your truth. So often, and when you couple that with the idea of being a martyr often for the sake of spiritualism, but not understanding our own capacities and what we're able to give from our cup, often we can again get resentful, resentful. It's really interesting, right? Because you really have to understand it. It's not, a selfish notion. It is the understanding of what my capability is to give service. What is my understanding of what my capability is to be around some difficult characters. It's what my capability is to be around those who may not speak the same love language as me. It's my capability to understand other human beings and understand myself at the same time. And so these waves of emotion, which I always talk to people about, the ocean of human emotion within myself, it's just knowing that I have to let each wave pass in a healthy manner. Because if I don't, I'm going to create a whirlpool within myself, which is resentment.
Absolutely. So, Brother Inayat, what are some of the symptoms or some of the reasons that trigger resentment within ourselves?
I think, again, it relates to what we're discussing, the idea that I cannot express myself. I don't have a voice. Because for me, authenticity is really important through learned experience, having lost it. The idea of knowing oneself when one is young, when one is a child, before your critical mass begins. Before you are more a calculative being, you are an intuitive one of feeling. You live in a hypnotic state of imagination from 2 to 7, theta state. beta hasn't even arrived. So often we are all constructions of our environment to some degree. So those are first emotional experiences we have can often create, when in a negative experience, trauma. And then, like you say, the word trigger just being to trigger that trauma, right? To return to oneself. And so again, in knowing oneself and understanding oneself and processing, we can reduce the triggers because it's just a bank of visual memories related to one's emotion. And so that's why I do hypnotherapy and regression work within rapid transformational therapy, because I found that it really can enable us to reframe that meaning that those first emotions gave us. And if we don't do that, what happens, we snowball on these emotions. When we see patterns of behavior later on in life that reflect that emotion, often we can have overreactions because it is a resurfacing subconsciously of those memories, feelings, and experiences. Does that make sense?
Yes. Yes, it does. Absolutely. I love the point where you mentioned that how our social environments bring in that change in shaping our identity, especially the way I think you're brought up when you're a child and you know you're watching maybe your parents at home or your family members or the people whom you interact with in your schooling system. And that really does shape a person as an adult. Like, you know, it grooms you, and there are certain emotions that you feed off on, and that's what you become. So I know that sometimes, you know, we have this this baggage of generational trauma that we carry on by, you know, watching our parents or our family members sometimes, and it sort of sticks to us. And then, as you said, like that resentment builds up, you know, it sort of piles up, and it's so difficult to let go of that. So how can one deal with such a scenario or such situations? Like, how can one deal with this sort of resentment?
Ah, you're so good. You're so good. The questions, they segue into each other and the topics. Forgiveness, the beauty of forgiveness, right? I'm sure many have heard the idea that, you know, one does not want to be a prisoner of one's own mind.
Right.
And that's about one's thought process, right? And as I've learned, or at least I like to theorize now, emotions create thoughts. So if my feelings, sensory or otherwise, internally, emotionally, spiritually, if that process from within then reflects my thoughts, if I'm not able to forgive for different experiences, situations, things that have happened to me, other people's energy, intentions, their flawed nature, life on life's terms, my flawed nature. If I'm not able to forgive, I often will not be able to let go, as you mentioned before, right? And then that leads to, interestingly, two different things, depending on the individual. One might start to numb themselves from their emotion and start to depress their emotion, right? In trying to press down their emotion, they get depression because they disconnect from themselves. And then it's very difficult for them to navigate the waves of emotions because they avoid them often. And in doing so, sometimes they're able very much so to plug the hole to experience no water. But eventually it boils and boils or builds and builds till then there's a burst. And then it all comes flooding in. And that's when you see heightened reactions to situations which you would have thought were quite, you know, quite normal, or, you know, it's quite an adverse reaction, or it's an overreaction. This is often what's happening. You know, it's that inability to navigate emotion and accept human beings all experiencing the same mad journey, you know, of just riding waves. And not everyone has the same skill set because we're all on a different path, all on a different pace, a different stage of the race. And so some people know how to swim, some can tread water, some can surf, some can deep sea dive. I've given these analogies before, but if we really deep it and think about it and deconstruct it, analyze it, there's a lot of interesting imagery within it, because I know that sometimes I've really struggled to sit with my emotions. I couldn't deep sea dive it. And for that moment, I had to learn just how to tread water.
Right.
until I could navigate these things, because the forgiveness hadn't come yet, hadn't arrived yet. You know, I was abused as a kid sexually, for instance. That was a grave thing for me, especially to have been done so by somebody of the Muslim community, who was a figurehead, who was an Islamic scholar. You know, all these things, like we talked about constructionism. How does one forgive and then return to the faith, feel like they belong, feel like they have identity within it?
Right.
The only way I could do so is through really understanding pain and flawed nature of humans. And in some degree, I became, you know, consumed by my pain. And then in my own flawed nature, recognized the symptoms and behaviors of one who might commit such a horrendous act. A small understanding, because I'm so flawed, right? I may not understand fully how one exacts that act, but I can understand that I was hit, so I've hit people. So in the same way, that person must have been abused to abuse me. And then
Right.
who do I blame? Do I blame their father, their grandfather, their great-grandfather? It's generational trauma often, right? It's not knowing how to parent, or not knowing how to deal with the amanat, the responsibility of this gift we've been given of a child. And so even within that, then I have to forgive myself that I'm not a father yet, you know, because there's so many things within it: acceptance and understanding, and knowing that God is the best planner within all of this. And why do I get trials, and why do I get all these strange, you know, interactions with people who then exact pain onto me? Because hurt people hurt people. And if you want to break the cycle, as a great professor once said, I can't quote them because I don't know the name, but I remember they were saying that our children will have to deal with any battle we do not choose to deal with.
Yeah, true. I think that's what's been happening today. Everybody's up for this breaking the cycle, breaking the generational trauma. As you said, like it's like a link, you know, it's like a chain that falls, right? For example, if someone gave you that pain, someone abused you, the way you said, so it's possible that they faced that, they had an encounter, and you know they are repeating that scenario again with you, and they don't realize that, you know, it's something wrong and that it's a mistake and that they should stop. You know, it's so difficult, and it takes time, right, for a person to heal as well. Like, you know, when you go through a certain phase, you can't just snap out of it and just, you know, forgive and, you know, become normal. It depends, I think, on every individual's healing power and healing strength. Like, how long does it take them? Some people can keep this for years. Some people are mentally strong enough to overcome it. So do you think it's okay to keep this thing, like, you know, within you for years? Like, for example, the way you said, when it's a cycle that keeps happening, it means that they took so much time to heal, and you know, they didn't recover out of it, they didn't overcome it, and so that's why the cycle kept repeating again. So what do you have to say on this?
It's an interesting one. I'm going to quote my friend Shay, who says, "You can never rush greatness." It's interesting because, as you mentioned, how can I dictate to one when they need to recover? Recovery is a journey of understanding. Understanding is power. So when I embark upon my journey of life, I don't know what the destination will be. I'm just going from moment to moment, experiencing. And so at a time when I can't process it yet, it's only because I don't have the tools. I haven't had the experience. I haven't reached the junction or the checkpoint whereby I get the next piece of information. And even if people around me are telling me, as a great boxing coach once said, telling is not teaching, I really need to experience somewhat of this in application, or I might really need something to resonate for the penny to drop in a piece of advice that I've sought. Either way, my journey, it's my process. So when I do harm myself in the process of holding resentment or snowballing emotion or not letting go, which I did, myself. I went through a divorce because I lacked love for myself, or I struggled to love others.
Mm.
You know, all these different experiences led me to today's understanding. And so when
Right.
somebody who's now struggling says, "Anaya, you're so inspirational," I have to remind them there was a time where I didn't know what it was to inspire, because I had no inspiration for myself, because I was being so resentful and bitter and in pain. But I almost had to learn them, sit with those emotions, understand them deeply. A bit like, you know, I teach MMA. You know, you have to understand what it's like to get hit and to overcome it in order to continue the fight. So in that process, there was so much learning and growth that I can't
Mm.
say that now I don't want that pain, or I don't want that experience, that time that I spent, and I regret all of that. I have to really understand it in a different way now, I find, because it has really empowered me, actually. And that's what's led me to have acceptance, and then more forgiveness, and then letting go. But it was a journey that I couldn't really map for somebody in advance.
Right. Yeah, it actually does make sense. You know, as you grow, as you mature, you know, you get a hang of that wisdom, as you said, because of the experiences. And of course, people will have these questions in their minds, like, why should I go through this pain? Why did I have to suffer in this journey or in this phase? And after a couple of years, you know, you realize that, okay, it taught me so many things. It was a learning curve for me. And there are sometimes some people, for example, who question themselves. For example, probably, you know, if they weren't really good with their parents, or maybe they didn't do enough for their parents while their parents were alive, and then later on, you know, their parents passed away, and now they've got this sort of, I don't know what to say, but a feeling of disappointment, or a lack, or, you know, a feeling of, again, a resentment. So how can one deal with such sort of an emotion?
Mm. You know, loss is a very interesting thing. And you've obviously mentioned one of the greatest losses. The closest thing to understanding our creator, that which created us, our parents. So in dealing with any loss, one recognizes there's a grieving process. And as you mentioned, regret often is the causal or consequential outcome of having not expressed true emotion at a time when we should have, or
Yes.
having not,
Yeah.
you know, followed our intuitive nature, but rather made a different decision based on rationalizations.
Yes.
Right? And this is why I go back to the child within, you know, the professor of play, right? Because that's what I had to learn for myself. Because when I was young, I was really pushed to be an adult quite quickly in some ways by my environment. And I didn't probably have an opportunity as much to know my intuitive self, know what feelings are. I just had to rationalize my way through, you know, make sense of it critically.
Mm.
But in the process of relearning myself, knowing myself from an emotional standpoint, it really has enabled me to understand, as we're describing, you know, what life is about. It is temporary, and
Yeah.
everything is going to go, including myself. And so if I do have regret now, if I have not expressed, let's say in the example you gave, that which I should have intuitively done, the love for my parents, spent in time, because time is the real currency. If I haven't done that, again, like I mentioned before about children or anything other, because some of us don't have children. I'm a teacher. I'm a coach. I get to work with children in a different capacity. If you just an uncle or an aunt, you know, whatever the capacity is, the point is, this is a cycle of teaching one another, giving service to one another, a cycle of experience, and then finding purpose in the value of expressing your experiences, right?
Right.
So even that, the idea that I lost my parents and I did not get to do X, Y, Z, can inform us then on how to love the next generation and all other human beings, including those who are elderly or don't have children who dote on them in the way that you should have or wanted to or regret having not done so. Do you get my point?
Yeah.
Because everything then becomes a stimulant. Sometimes that which we have in abundance, then we are not motivated. Sometimes that which we are lacking, we then are motivated by, right? So this idea of living a perfect life is non-existent. It's life on life's terms, and ultimately, good or bad, it's a teacher. So that would be my answer to that. But for those who obviously are in the position that can make change, again, they have a different position in their race, a different pace, a different stage. And so they can observe those who are in front by a few miles, and they can observe, the trials and tribulations of their run, and know from it that that's maybe what I should be doing then, right? So again,
Right.
we're all just observing each other to learn, and hopefully within that, we learn in a way that benefits us.
Right. So earlier on in my last podcast with Sister Sabira, she mentioned something really nice about emotional maturity, where she said that our emotional maturity, impacts how we treat others, and it has an impact on people, how they will also react towards us, right? So, for example, when it comes to resentment, as you said, maybe if someone is going through this phase where they've been either abused, or they've been hurt in some way. It could be in a relationship between couples, or it could be in any other sort of relationship. So the person changes, right? There are these negative some toxic traits sometimes that show up, or sometimes the person is very aloof, and he's isolated, and he's not giving out this welcoming energy. So what would you like to say about this? Because the way when someone perceives this person, it's like this person is showing off a lot of negativity. There's a negative energy that you're feeling off from him, but this person has actually gone through a hard phase that nobody actually has understood, or has talked to him, or do you get me? So
Completely.
yeah.
Completely. Like I said before, hurt people, right?
Right.
So, whether it's through action or inaction, whether it's through silence and distance, or overwhelming somebody with, their expression, right? There's different ends of the spectrum, but like you say, ultimately, when you meet somebody who you find difficult to cope with, it's often like the saying that, when you point a finger, you have three fingers coming back. It's because you find it difficult,
Right.
actually. And if we focus on oneself before others, then we have more capacity to give to others. Because again, it's about knowing yourself. Like Imam Ali says, knowing your emotions, you'll know God. You'll know this creation. You'll know why you have this individual narrative. I've read something recently about our souls choose, the families and the lives we live within. I don't know how true it is, but again, like I'm not a scholar, but I read somewhere that in coming from God, the idea that, to him we will return.
Right.
It is that there's so much rahmah in this test. That's why we are capable. And you only get given what you're capable to handle, because somewhere our rule chose it. That's deep, right? But if that is the case, right?
Yeah.
When I see somebody who's really difficult, it might remind me of my childhood and the difficulties I had with my father. It might remind me of the difficulties I had at school and certain difficult characters who might have bullied me, right? It could be whatever. It could be, anything that you are struggling with emotionally. You will often find when you meet a person who you find difficult, there'll be a reflection somewhere within that of what you struggle with emotionally, right? And so that's why often we then react towards them. We overthink, we get anxious, we worry, right? Rather than being present with them and feeling their energy and understanding why they're closed, what is needed in order to unveil and open them, what love do they need to penetrate their walls and their shields. Understanding, right?
Right.
And it's only, again, going back to the fact that I was such a flawed human being, and in some way, overtly experimented in all the flawed ways, that I really understand. That when I sit with a drug addict or an alcoholic or somebody who is displaying what society finds really difficult to handle, you know, because it's problematic, it's not functional.
Right.
It gives us problems, right? They forget
Right.
what that person's going through, that they're self-medicating in a way that's so destructive because they can't handle life and they've lost the love of life. It's almost, they're too scared to commit suicide, but this is a slow way to just deal with it. I'm just going to survive each day by escaping myself. So rather than hating on that person, for instance, I'm just giving this example because I went through addiction problems, right? And I can imagine what my family had to deal with, or my ex-wife had to deal with, especially in an Islamic environment. It's the idea that, you know, I can't handle this person's problems, really and truly, right? It's back to I, yeah? So when I meet anybody now that I find it a little bit difficult to deal with, I really ask myself those questions first. And then I return to them with more love once I've understood myself.
Right. Right. Thank you so much for, sharing all of that, Brother Inayat, because um, I think, it's it's really important and crucial sometimes to discuss such scenarios that are from your real life, so that people can take examples from, because there are some people, as you said, for example, children. I would like to bring their examples. Children of divorced parents, right? I think they get stuck in this phase, watching their parents, for example, fighting throughout their lives, and then now they're on their own, they have to struggle. And when they get married, they've got this trauma in their minds, because the picture that they have, the image that they have of their father is somewhat like that, and the mother is somewhat like that, and it automatically has that influence in the household automatically and in the relationship, and then the cycle follows. The children see it and everything. So in situations as these, again, I think uh, it is so important to go back to our Quran and the Ahlul Bayt, because as you even mentioned, like, what are we as humans? We are literally
Thereafter, oh, interesting.
uh, sorry, can
There's
you
just a
hear
slight
me?
glitch. Yeah, there's just a slight glitch. So I was just saying
Okay,
to our audience, I wonder
sorry.
if they could still
I
hear me. But yeah, go on.
Okay, sorry, I've just got a slight technical issue, but I'm back. Okay,
You are back.
so I was just discussing about the scenario, right? That what children of divorced parents go through. It's something that is it's really frustrating for the child, and it's so difficult for them to overcome their hardships. And as you went back to Imam Ali's saying, I really liked how you said that, we as humans, we are literally nothing. Like, we are flawed human beings ourselves. We've got our own flaws, and, it's all about us improving ourselves and, creating that relationship with God. And so what are some final thoughts, Brother Inayat, that you would like to share with us on today's program?
Well, I think, look, maybe I can answer somewhat of what you mentioned there about children. I know you gave in the context of divorce, but just generally, if we start there and then end with children, because it's so important to the formation of future generations and ourselves, right? Because like we said at the beginning, we're talking about the inner child, talking about our
Right.
traumas, talking about our
Yes.
childhood, and we're talking
Yeah.
about parenting. I'm
Yeah.
writing a drama series at the moment for a channel I can't mention, but hopefully, inshallah, it's in from Muslim media, so everyone will get to see it, inshallah, when it gets made. But we're talking about this exact issue:
Right.
family marital breakdowns and how do they occur, and then linking it to all the different things. And then we're doing research, meeting like mediators and like family organizations and all sorts of different stuff, right? On from a welfare
Right.
perspective,
Yeah.
because it all links. And like you mentioned, our faith has so much beauty and understanding, because
Right.
0 to 7 will tell you They give you models, right? 7 to 14, they give us models. When a child is a child, they're the king, you're the slave. But often
Right.
many of us go the other way around, where I want to get to that general stage. I want to be the boss. I want to be the sergeant. I want military drill. I want to put you in line. You know, kids are not puppets. They're not toys. They're not pets. You know, they're an energy. We're spiritual beings in physical casing. Spiritual just means non-material. You can't see what's going on inside of them, but we like to project like we can just because we're trying to understand ourselves. And we don't fully understand ourselves yet we want to control our children.
True, absolutely.
You know,
This is such an important point that you mentioned, really. Like, you know, we can't control our own emotions and we try to control our children. This is a very good point. Yes.
But then when you talk about a child of divorce, right, where they've seen a marital breakdown, they've seen the people that brought them into the world are not able to cope with handling one another.
Yeah.
And in the process handle them. Often there's huge baggage which comes with that, right? And like you say, even those who see maybe let's take another example, just a marriage which is very flawed in the nature of toxicities and the way they communicate. Again, it can give someone deep-seated issues about marriage, and that's why often their marriage might not work out, or they might choose the wrong partner, they might suffer in their marriage, all sorts of different things, right? This is all about the art of communication. And so going back to it, children just generally understand your child. How many people ask them how they feel? You know, we're very instructional, but how many questions do you ask your child? Children ask us questions. You know, we always say that. They're always asking, like, why this, why that? And we get tired. Why do we get saturated? Why are we saturated? It's really interesting to observe these things, right? And so within that, the last things I'll just say is treat a child like a king, you know, or a queen, because in doing so, you will then see that when they reach the age of personal responsibility and understanding, because their cup has been so full of love, no judgment, openness, trust, within all of that, if my parent can be like that, what must God be like?
True. Yeah.
And then beyond that, they have the capacity to love themselves and everyone other.
True. Also, just to add one point, I think it just clicked me right now. You know, sometimes we also face identity issues, right? In the sense that maybe because there's a lot of toxicity in the background that you come from, or from the family that you belong to, and because of that, you know, you have to carry that defamation, or, you know, taunts and talks for the rest of your life. And because of that, there's a lot of hatred and resentment that builds up with your own family members because of, you know, that. So how can one deal with that? That is difficult, I think.
Well, I suppose it's the other side of the coin. That's the other side of the coin, Sakina. Yeah. It's, whilst we're saying protect the child, at the same time, we're also saying the human is so flawed, right?
Right.
And then we talked earlier, I love this, this is the point, right? Everything is so antithetical, you know, everything's antithesis. It's a whole spherical kind of situation. You've got to find equilibrium within it, right?
Yeah.
So how do we balance all of this? Again, forgiveness. And not resending emotion around ourselves, because nobody is guaranteed from day one a perfect parent.
Right.
How do we square what's going on in the world right now with children dying? Exactly. How does that person, what is their position in terms of forgiveness and resentment? You know, we're not all guaranteed the perfect life. However, what we are guaranteed is life on life's terms. Right. And within that, we have to find our purpose. And our purpose is for one another, essentially, to pass love to one another, to teach one another before we leave and go back to the Creator. True. And so in this flawed, temporary world, if I am given parents who unfortunately weren't able to navigate their emotion initially, well, unfortunately really bad in their communication. Because I was talking to my cousin just last night after iftar, you know, if a parent hits their child, is it the end of the world? I said, yes, it is the end of the world first for that child in that moment. But if the parent comes back and explicates to the child the flawed nature of themselves and they were wrong for doing so and apologize and say, I'll never do it again, that child won't have PTSD or ongoing trauma because they can release their emotion. They can express, well, I did not like it. I was scared of you. I felt threatened. Why did you do it? I thought you loved me. You can have the conversation. But
Very
if a
true.
parent acts like, no, you did wrong, I hit you because you deserved it, that creates a whole different kettle of resentment, right? That will create a whole different human and a whole different amount of emotion. And so, like we mentioned, whether it is I have to forgive myself or I have to forgive another, that process is what allows one to not have resentment, resent emotion that boils over and then destroys your connection with yourself and life, and then ends up you then struggling.
It's an irony, you know, brother, and the point that you highlighted, I know this for a fact, and I've heard a lot of parents who say that, you know, they sometimes feel ashamed, or sometimes they feel like it's something like guilty. They feel guilty and blamed that, oh, you know, when my child was small, I was very harsh on them, and you know, I used to hit them sometimes. But what they say is that I did this for your benefits. I did this for you, so that when you grow up today, whatever you are today, it's because of, you know, what I did that at that time. If I hadn't done so, then, you know, you wouldn't be the adult that you are today. And the child also reciprocates the same dialogue and says, you know what, mom, dad, I'm so grateful to you for
I
what
literally
you
had this
did.
conversation last night. I hope my cousin's watching. I'm not going to expose her. She's a teacher as well. So, like, you know, we were really going at it. And I respect her opinion because, interestingly, look, I understand why the person's doing that.
Yeah.
Because to some degree, they still have managed to retain love for their parent.
Yeah.
Right? So despite being hit, despite maybe the physical, I call it physical abuse, right? Because look, I teach kids how to fight, right? Why am I teaching them how to
Right.
fight? Because I don't want them to get beaten up, right? You know, I want them to be able to protect themselves. So when the person who's supposed to love me the most in life hits me, and remember, there's gratuitous hitting, and then there's one spank because the child nearly ran across in front of the car, and you couldn't control your emotion. In that moment, I couldn't express it any other way than just to hit you, being like, "What are you doing? I was told you to hold my hand." Right? I get these things, these flawed moments of not being able to communicate, but the idea that I did you a favor by hitting you, I find really damaging, because what does it show about my lack of control as an adult, and what am I expressing to my child about how do you deal with your emotion? Because as I say, when I was in school, you know, I can only expose myself. I was just speaking to a friend, I'm going to a Sefri party now. Even in madrasa, you know, I was so mean to certain kids who I felt were threatening me, because I dealt with bullies and I dealt with also adults hitting me. So when the power shift came for me, where I recognized, oh, if I hit back first, in fact, if I become bigger and louder and harsher, that process of intimidation will get me somewhere. I'll get results. It's just because I can't handle emotion. I can't handle the situation. And that is a learned behavior. So how can I advocate for a parent to do that ever?
True. Very true. Absolutely. Yeah, I think you know, you've put it out very well, and I think we sort of need to change this narrative now, and we need to bring a little bit of leniency, and you know, try to understand these emotions from this aspect that, you know, you're addressing about, because we've gotten very used to the fact that, you know, a child from the beginning has been you know, expected to be independent. And how do you become independent? By going through hardships, by us being strict with you from a very young age, and that's how you will turn out to be independent. Otherwise, you might not turn out to be independent, and you know, you will be
Very much
taken advantage of.
very much fear
Yeah, you know.
It's an emotion again, right? It's one of the most primal emotions. Sometimes they talk about there's only 3 or 4 primal emotions. So, like, you know, to be fear driven and then to educate our children through fear is really strange. I call fear false expectation appearing real, right? because it's your expectation, and you think you're God right now, don't you? So you want to plan for your child, but ultimately God is the best planner. So within that, just let go, right? Stop speaking fear to your child. How do you know that in empowering them, they're not going to find value in that and then really understand the worth of responsibility and hardship? You know, it's a bit like we talk about, you know, like how our great saintly Imam Ali talks about the relationship with God. Like, you know, the creator, it shouldn't be transactional, like a businessman. What am I getting? It shouldn't be led by fear. It's got to be done through worth, value. So again, with your child, take the same model. We're made in that image. Like, ultimately, don't lead your child through life using fear as the carrot and stick. You know, well, I did this for you because, you know, I needed to teach you. Like, you know, like, it's so interesting, the rationalization. I was like, why wouldn't you just explain? Talk, the gift of God, voice, right? So it is interesting because I think, you know, as a storyteller, you know, as a performing artist and a writer and things like that, I learned through these processes that human beings love stories. Look at our Quran, look at our Bible, look at, you know, the Sanskrit scrolls, look at, like, you know, the Torah. Within all of this is stories and stories of human nature, right? And within these stories, we find messages of learning for ourselves because we are just but humans. And so in that, why can't we teach our children through that process? You know, I can tell them about my experiences, good and bad, and children will learn so much more than scaring them, because you know, you think you don't have the capacity, or they don't have the capacity to understand.
Right. Okay, then, wow, that was, I think, a very nice discussion. I think we were finally like getting and connecting the dots and getting into this really nice heated conversation with a lot of good questions and ideas. It's time to wrap up our program, and I would like to thank you so much, Brother Inayat, for sharing such amazing points. That were very personal, very I think they were very valid points that everybody can relate to, and I guess we can take so many lessons from today's conversation. So I really want to thank you for your time.
Thank you for such insightful questions and being such a good active listener. As I said, it's another thing we can talk about in another podcast, right? Because you know, you're present with the emotion and the thoughts as a result. So it makes for a moment of connection, right, and understanding. So no, thank you for having me, Sakina, as always. And inshallah, I look forward to the next one, because it's a blessing to have these opportunities with Lantern of Light, because the work you guys are doing is phenomenal.
Thank you so much. I would just like to remind all our viewers that Lantern of Light charity is really here for you all to support your emotional, spiritual, and mental well-being needs. We have transformed and are transforming lives, and it will only take you 60 seconds to get on your phone and press the link to donate, which is in our comment section and in our caption, and also available on our stories and in our bios. And please do consider donating to our various Shahar Ramadan campaigns, such as Sahifatul Sajjadiyah podcast series, Lantern of Light's mental health well-being podcasts, Ramadan iftar parcels for the most underprivileged Shia families in Kenya, transforming journeys through Quran and Dua, Layal al-Qadr events, and orphans and widows educational projects. And once you have donated, please do not forget to put reference to what you are donating for. If you are a UK taxpayer, please consider to tick the gift aid box. And inshallah, we look forward to your contributions and support. And if you like today's program, please do let us know in the comment section. Do give us feedback. And if there are any questions, please do let us know. Our therapists are available here. Our coaches are available here to guide us and to you know, they've done a lot of research to help us really, and you know, we are doing all this at a very minimal fee, or actually on a free basis, really. People who are struggling to, you know, get these mental health support are struggling financially, but Lantern of Light, on the contrary, is trying their level best to spread this awareness globally. So we would urge and encourage each one of you to make sure to tune into these podcasts and share it to as many people as possible. Thank you very much. This is your host, Sakina Habib, signing off. Jazakumullahu khairan. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.